A January evening in 2024 Balashika near Moscow, Russia. The holidays have just ended and the post-New Year mood still lingers in the air. The neighbors' windows are still lit up with string lights, the air smells of pine and tangerines, and you want to make plans for the future and drink champagne with your loved ones. Kristina Dudkina is spending the evening with her boyfriend, Artyom Misyura. They've been dating for a year and are already thinking about getting married. Artyom is caring and serious. He talks to Kristina about having children and seems ready to do anything for her. The girl is sure she's lucky. Artyom pours gin into a glass with ice and hands it to Kristina. "Come on, here's to us." The girl takes a few sips, keeps chatting about some little things, then finishes her drink. The gin has a slightly sweet taste, but she doesn't pay attention, absorbed in her dreams and plans. Kristina doesn't know yet that in a few hours she'll feel sick, that doctors will fight for her life, that she'll spend the next 20 days in a coma from which she'll only recover by a miracle. And she certainly doesn't know that the guy sitting next to her on the couch will soon be on trial, accused of poisoning at least 9 people. You're on the Strashnota channel, and today we have an unusual case about how someone can be raised to later harm everyone. I'll leave additional materials in the Strashnota Telegram channel. Also, subscribe to Patreon and Boosty. It's free, so you won't get lost. And leave likes, dislikes, and comments after, of course, you've watched the entire video. Artyom Misyura was born in 1999 in the city of Balashika, Moscow region. There is no information about the real father of the future poisoner in publicly available sources. When Artyom was about 5 or 6, his mother, Ekaterina Polina, married a man named Dmitry. For the boy, he quickly became part of the family. At first, Artyom called him dad, and later, as he grew older, father. According to Misyura himself, Ekaterina loved her son very much, not least for his character. She called him her hope and support. Artyom grew up quiet and calm. He never got mixed up in anything and rarely got into conflicts. School came easily to him, and he had little trouble with any subject. Both his mother and his grandmother Irina were proud of him. Soon Ekaterina gave birth to a child with her new husband, a girl. That's how Artyom got a sister. The happy parents let the boy choose a name for the newborn. He didn't think long and suggested Alexandra. The reason was simple and a bit touching. There was a girl at school he liked whose name was Sasha. He really loved his sister. According to acquaintances and to Artyom himself, their relationship was warm and close. Artyom enjoyed spending time with Sasha and helped her with her homework. The brother and sister rarely argued, but not everything in the family was smooth. Misyura remained a quiet, modest boy, even a bit shy. In conflicts, he preferred to stay silent, and in arguments, he often gave in. According to him, this was exactly what irritated his stepfather. Dmitry never raised his hand against his stepson, and he hardly ever raised his voice. But, as Misyura claimed, he was constantly trying to reform the quiet teenager. The pressure was psychological. Heart-to-heart talks, an oppressive stare, a heavy hand on the shoulder. Very often, he repeated the same phrase, like a mantra he intended to firmly hammer into the boy's head. "You're soft, weak. You'll never achieve anything in life like that. If you want to succeed at something, you need to be bolder, more assertive. You have to make your own way." These conversations happened over and over again. According to Artyom, his stepfather even took him to some monk of Greek origin who was supposed to guide him onto the path of truth. They communicated through a translator, and it's not exactly known what they talked about. But later, Misyura recalled that the guidance seemed strange to him. It was as if the monk was simply voicing Dmitry's thoughts, just in a more solemn religious manner. This made Artyom angry and hurt, but life went on as usual. School, friends, first crushes. From elementary school and almost until graduation, Artyom was friends with one girl. Childhood friendship gradually turned into a first innocent love, which touched both parents and teachers. Real adult relationships came later. It happened when Artyom entered the Faculty of Economics at the Moscow State Technical University of Automobile and Road Construction. There he met and started dating a girl named Maria. But when it came to the girl, Dmitri once again interfered in his stepson's life. The stepfather disapproved of this relationship almost immediately. In his opinion, Maria was not from their circle. Her parents lived modestly, and she dressed simply without any pretensions. But Artyom needed someone who knew the value of money. Yekaterina tried to stand up for her son, saying that it's his future and happiness isn't about money. But she still didn't dare to openly go against her husband. As a result, Masha never once appeared in their house. Artyom didn't even try to introduce her to his family. The relationship gradually faded away and the couple broke up. However, the stepfather was strict not only with his stepson. The younger biological daughter also got her share. Miss Yura said that when Sasha grew up a little, the stepfather set some strange rules in the house. When he came back from work, you absolutely had to greet him, and not just come out to the doorstep. Sasha had to run to the door and happily hug her dad. If the girl was tired, sick, or just not in the mood, Dmitri was extremely displeased. Sasha loved her dad and didn't want to disappoint him, so she would run out. In 2021, Artyom Misyura graduated from the Moscow State Technical University of Automobile and Road Construction. The degree was quite solid, and the prospects looked good. For a while he considered going to graduate school, but changed his mind. With a bachelor's degree, he could already work and earn money, but he still needed to find a truly well-paid job. For now, Misyura got a job as a manager at a car rental company. At the same time, he worked part-time as a tutor in two difficult subjects, mathematics and chemistry. He received good reviews. The students' parents said that the guy explained things clearly, patiently and calmly, and was able to break down complex topics step by step. We started with C grades, but thanks to Artyom, my son raised his average to a B. And he even got an A on his test. The mothers shared their children's successes.
They never suspected him. He was very nice and calm. I saw him going out during the day, so I thought he didn't work. Or maybe he was a student.
Miss Yura had a steady stream of students. Plus, his salary as a manager at a car rental company allowed him to make ends meet. But that wasn't enough for the ambitious Artyom. He considered himself a capable person, and he had reasons for that. He graduated from university with good marks. He knew English. He even became the silver medalist in the All-Russian English dictation contest. It would seem that his starting point were quite decent. All that was left was to wait for luck to finally turn his way. But that hadn't happened yet. However, Misyura had no real reason to complain about his life. After university, he moved into his own apartment in the Izmailovsky Forest residential complex. His mother and stepfather bought the apartment for him. In fact, it was right next door to theirs. Yekaterina and Dmitri lived in the next section of the building. Misyura often visited them. He would ask how Sasha was doing. Yekaterina also stopped by his place. She brought homemade food. After all, mom's food is better than store-bought. Thus, by the age of 22, Artyom Misyura already had his own apartment. At his age, many can only dream of that. His mother helped him with money from time to time. His grandmother helped too. She adored her grandson. She called him her favorite boy, and she also tried to support him. But even having his own apartment wasn't enough for Artyom. He wanted much more. Not just a normal life, a very nice one. Nice, very nice, an expensive one. Glamorous, so that everyone would be envious and see that he, a quiet and modest guy, not only achieved something but surpassed and outdid those who were more pushy and brazen. He wanted a luxury car, vacations abroad. He wanted to dress well and take his beautiful girlfriend to the best restaurants. In general, Artyom wanted the kind of life that influencers show off, and really just all kinds of people on Instagram and other social media. Rich, successful people from Instagram enjoy life every day, admire sunsets from the windows of their huge mansions, and post photos from different cities around the world every day. Artyom might not have known that all of this was fake and just for show, or maybe he did know. Either way, he also took those kinds of showy, successful-looking photos himself. In front of the Audi he bought with money borrowed from a friend, with the sea behind him on a trip paid for by his parents. From the outside, everything looked quite convincing. Young, successful, a car, travel, a girlfriend. But it was just a mask. In reality, Artyom Misyura couldn't afford such a life yet, although actually he did allow himself a better life than the vast majority of his peers, but he wanted more. Very much so, and this gap between his dream and reality made him more and more angry. It turned out that his stepfather, with all his lectures, might have been right, and that you really can't achieve anything in this life by being quiet. And what do you think? Write in the comments. Well, Dmitri also added fuel to the fire, more and more often hinting to his stepson that it was time to stop relying on his mother and finally find a real job. You have an education, you have brains. Stop going to clubs and start growing up, the man said. The truth is, by that time, Artyom was no longer as quiet as people remembered him in school. During this period, a trait became more and more apparent in him, a trait that many acquaintances would later talk about. He had one ruinous obsession: money. It was a mad passion. He was caught stealing, and he honestly replied, "When I see other people's money, it seems to me that it's mine," people around him recalled. Artyom Misyura was caught more than once by relatives and friends for petty theft. He could take money lying on a friend's nightstand at home, or even get into a wallet if the owner left it in plain sight. "I needed it urgently. Sorry for taking it, I'll pay it back." Honest to God, Misyura swore, and he didn't return it. The money called to him, lured him. Moreover, Misyura very easily took other people's things for himself, but he really hated parting with his own. Some sources mention one particularly telling episode from the future criminal's biography. One day, Misyura ordered alloy wheels for his Audi from a company. They cost about 55,000, and he was supposed to pay for the wheels upon receiving them, and the seller seemingly had no reason not to trust him. But Misyura received the wheels, installed them, and then decided not to pay. The seller was already ready to go to court, but the story somehow died down on its own. Maybe his mother or stepfather intervened. That time, Misyura got lucky. But later it would become obvious to psychologists. And this event, as well as all the previous episodes of theft, clearly pointed to one thing. Artyom Misyura was ready to commit a crime for money. However, at that time, no one could have even guessed how far his destructive passion would take him. In 2023, a new chapter began in Artyom's life. He started dating a girl named Kristina Dudkina. Kristina comes from a wealthy family with striking, eye-catching looks. In short, the kind of person who immediately draws attention. Misyura knew how to approach girls, and his mask of being successful and wealthy worked perfectly here. The relationship developed quickly. The couple became practically inseparable. Acquaintances noticed that Kristina was simply crazy about Artyom. Soon, the young couple was already talking about a future together, discussing marriage, and even planning to have children. This time, Artyom's stepfather Roman approved. Kristina was from their circle. She was a good fit for them. From the outside, the couple seemed almost perfect. The young couple is in love and moving toward marriage and starting a family. But Misyura knew that all of this was just another mask, a facade hiding a life that was far from rosy. Kristina Dudkina wasn't short of money and was used to living large. Restaurants and expensive shopping were a natural part of life for her. Kristina wanted dates and romance with her boyfriend, but Artyom still didn't have any money, or rather the money would appear and then disappear right away. The debt for the Audi he bought with his friend's money still hadn't gone anywhere. His friend was reminding him more and more often to pay it back. Misura kept making excuses and swore he'd pay it back soon. At the same time, Artyom borrowed money from a microfinance organization. And that's a completely different world, where debt grows at the speed of light, and staying there for too long is very dangerous. To cover at least some of the gaps, Artyom started borrowing money from everyone he could. He borrowed from his grandmother, promising to pay her back. He asked his mother, his friend Kostya, and Christina's brother Ilya. He didn't ask Christina herself. On one hand, he was ashamed. On the other hand, Misura was still trying to maintain that successful image in front of her. That same guy with the car, travel, and the beautiful life. But money was needed. And then he went back to what he'd already been caught doing more than once. He started stealing from Christina. Usually this happened when Christina was asleep or distracted. Misura took small amounts, ones that could be explained by shopping expenses or carelessness, like, "We bought you a blouse, did you forget? Are you sure you didn't pay 5,000 instead of 1,000 at the store?" He tried to help in the search for Misura, but then he started taking more straight from the wallet or even just withdrawing money from Christina's card. Up to a certain point, Christina kept quiet. Maybe she hoped it was an accident or a mistake, or that Artyom would definitely explain everything himself. But when the missing amount exceeded 50,000, it was no longer possible to stay silent. The girl directly asked Artyom to return the money. The conversation was difficult. Artyom admitted that he had debts. He said that debt collectors were already starting to bother him. He explained that he was just trying to get out of this mess, and that this difficult period would be over soon, and then he would pay everything back. At that time, Misura was spending more and more time in online casinos. The money was given by his mother and grandmother, and in the end, Misura owed his grandmother almost 500,000. Often that's exactly where the money went. He kept playing over and over, telling himself one simple thing. Just a little more, another deposit, one more deposit, and then everything will change. We'll win it back. He'll hit the jackpot, pay off his debts, and start a new life. But of course, the jackpot never came. And with each month, the debts only kept growing. And so, the quiet and calm guy, who was once reproached for being too soft, seemed to come to a conclusion. He couldn't wait any longer. If fate doesn't give you money, then you have to take it from fate. Around that time, a post appeared on Misura's VKontakte page with a quote from the legendary boxer Floyd Mayweather Jr. It went like this: "You are a bunch of lazy nobodies who cover up your laziness with excuses. You will never stand on the podium or conquer Everest. Your dreams will always remain just dreams. You are puddles of mud, lacking purpose, willpower, or perseverance. You are always too busy, your legs hurt, you are too tired, too young, too old, too sick, and just not in the mood. All that's left for you is to look enviously at successful people and hate them. You hate them because their success reminds you of your own insignificance." Many friends later said they were surprised to see such an openly misanthropic, emotionally charged, angry post on Artyom's page. Perhaps at that time it reflected the feelings of Missy himself. Misura, who was drowning in debt, saw himself as a failure and was ready to break through by any means. Misura began purchasing poisonous substances in early January 2024. Other sources say it was at the end of 2023.
What was the purpose behind purchasing and using these substances?
By that time, Misura's debts could no longer be ignored. Loans, debts to friends, and to his grandmother, from whom he had borrowed money once again. All of this amounted to almost 4 million rubles. Debt collectors increased the pressure, and Artyom started actively looking for a solution to the problem. Not a better job, not a way to negotiate with the creditors, but something else. Poisons. In search of the right one, he thoroughly combed the internet. 2 criteria worried him the most. He needed a substance that could be legally kept at home. For example, a medicine. This substance had to cause illness and death gradually, and it had to look natural. He chose ethylene glycol. Ethylene glycol is best known as a component of antifreeze. It has a sickly sweet taste. Most importantly, when it enters the body, it causes severe poisoning. It affects the kidneys and the nervous system. The symptoms may resemble regular alcohol intoxication. According to the investigation, Artyom Mishura immediately planned all his subsequent poisonings. The motive was purely self-serving. To pay off his debts, Artyom needed to get money or property. The most obvious asset in the family was his grandmother Irina's apartment. He still had a very trusting and warm relationship with her, but she could no longer lend money to her grandson. The woman was almost 70. If she suddenly got sick and died, no one would be surprised. But there was a little problem. After the grandmother's death, the apartment would go to two heirs, Artyom's mother and her brother. This meant that there were still two obstacles on the way to the money that needed to be removed. And Artyom made this decision, coldly and fully aware of all the consequences. Later, Mishura would say that by that time his relationship with his stepfather Dmitri had completely deteriorated. According to him, he kept interfering in his life and criticizing him. He even tried to turn his younger sister Sasha and his mother against Artyom and his grandmother. That meant the stepfather had to be eliminated or at least punished, but Artyom didn't start with his relatives. If something went wrong, suspicion would fall on him first of all. Mishura needed a first test subject, a sort of guinea pig he could observe. And who, if anything happened, wouldn't be able to cause any harm. The guinea pig was found quickly. In January 2024, Artyom poisoned Kristina Dudkina, whom he was living with at the time and planned to marry. The couple was at home on an ordinary evening. Mishura casually suggested to Kristina that they open a bottle of gin, which she had once given him as a gift. He secretly mixed ethylene glycol into the gin. He tried not to watch Kristina as she drank, so as not to give himself away. Later in court, Mishura would explain this in a strange way. He would say that the decision was spontaneous. Supposedly, he just thought that if Kristina felt unwell, he could take care of his own business and calmly visit his relatives. I had no peace because of her. She meddled in everything, didn't let me breathe. That's what he'll say in court in his defense. The poison gin worked. Kristina started feeling unwell. She collapsed to the floor, almost unconscious. Mishura rushed to call an ambulance. He played the role of a caring guy very convincingly. He went to the hospital with Kristina. He held her hand and assured her that everything would be fine. Because of the poisoning, Kristina fell into a coma and spent almost 20 days in it. Fortunately, she pulled through with almost no lasting effects. The doctors diagnosed the girl with a brain hemorrhage. It was caused by alcohol poisoning. The version seemed plausible. Even expensive gin can be of poor quality, Mishura agreed. All this time, he kept visiting Kristina in the hospital, but at the same time, he was also busy with other things. While Kristina was lying unconscious and fighting for her life, Mishura took out a loan in her name for almost 600,000 rubles. He used this money to pay off his debt to a microfinance organization and to settle some small debts. When Kristina got out of the hospital and found out what her boyfriend had done, she just broke down in tears. Artyom, as usual, assured her that he would pay everything back later. Well, of course, he never paid anything back. So, Kristina Dudkina survived after the poisoning, and the whole situation convinced Artyom that his plan would work. The poison works, the victim doesn't complain about the strange taste, and doctors can be fooled. The diagnoses sound plausible, and most importantly, no one suspects that the person who planned all this is very close by. Mishura chose his stepfather Dmitri as his next target. The poisoner began carrying out this part of the plan in early February 2024. For this, Artyom bought a liter of berry drink and added about 50 milliliters of ethylene glycol to it. Later in court, he calmly explained why he chose this particular method. Ethylene glycol is very sweet. In the fruit drink, it mixed in unnoticed. If you stir it well, it doesn't stand out at all. The plan was quite simple. Misura wanted to meet with his stepfather outside the house to eliminate the possibility of his mother and sister witnessing it. He wanted to invite Dmitri somewhere to sit and talk, maybe even just in the car, saying he needed advice, that he had a lot of debts. In general, there is always a reason to talk, and in the process Misura planned to offer Dmitri a drink and then see how things would go. But it wasn't meant to be Dmitri who became the victim of the poisoned drink. Instead, the drink was consumed by Misura's good friend, Konstantin Kaminsky. There are two versions of what happened that day, February 3rd, 2024. One is the investigator's version, and the other is the version Artyom will insist on. The investigation found his friend's poisoning was intentional, not accidental. Misura was in the car with Kaminsky and was the one who offered him the juice. After that, as if nothing had happened, he drove his friend home, and a day later he found out that Kaminsky had fallen ill and was in intensive care. However, Misura describes the events differently. According to him, he wasn't planning to use the car that day at all. Before that, he and his friend had been drinking, and he simply forgot about the bottle of fruit drink that was inside. Kostik just asked to go for a ride. I didn't even think about it. I just wanted to make him happy. Misura claimed that he never even thought Kostik would find that bottle. Then, according to his version, everything happened by accident. While he got out of the car to clear the snow, Konstantin got inside. He saw the bottle of fruit drink and took a few sips, just like that, because he wanted to try it. By the time Artyom noticed, it was already too late. He allegedly snatched the bottle from his friend and quietly poured the rest into the snow, but nothing could be changed anymore. The poison had already begun its deadly work. The friends went home. Misura stayed silent and tormented himself with guilt, but he never said a word. The next day, Konstantin fell ill. The doctors tried to save him, but they couldn't. The young man died from severe poisoning by an unknown substance. If the doctors had known what they were dealing with, the guy might have had a chance. But Misura stayed silent. He silently watched his friend die. He wasn't going to save him. I can't help but accept the blame. By not telling his father about the poison in the bottle, I think that's where my guilt lies. There was a chance to save him, and I didn't say anything. After the death of Konstantin Kaminsky, Artyom Misura behaved as a person should after losing a friend. He acted shocked and confused. He kept saying he couldn't believe what had happened. But Konstantin's relatives unexpectedly forbade Misura from attending the funeral. It's not exactly known why they made that decision. Perhaps it was an instinctive distrust. Maybe something in his behavior seemed strange. Misura himself later said that he was offended by this. It all happened accidentally. He really did take Konstantin's death very hard. After this incident, Artyom decided it was better not to use ethylene glycol anymore. The risk of unintended victims was too high. Besides, a third similar incident in his circle would clearly arouse suspicion. For now, he gave up on trying to kill or injure his stepfather. Next in line was Grandma Irina. By that time, Misura's debt situation had completely gotten out of control. Microloans were piling up and the interest was increasing every day. The debt collectors kept threatening him. At the same time, sources say that he supposedly took out a loan in Christina's name to pay off his microloans, but either he didn't pay them off or it didn't help. Either way, the financial situation was getting worse. He tried to ask his stepfather for money. He refused. Misura still didn't have a job. He was looking for one where he could make a lot of money, but not actually work. But he couldn't find any such vacancies. To stay afloat, he started selling his belongings, including those that his parents had once bought for him. But that hardly solved anything. By that time, it was becoming harder and harder to pretend to Christina that everything was fine. The girl already knew about the money that was disappearing from her wallet. She was about to find out about the loan that Artyom had taken out in her name while she was in the hospital. There was no one left to borrow money from. And Miss Yura decided to poison his grandmother, not to death, as he would later repeat, but so that she would end up in the hospital. While the elderly woman was in the hospital, her grandson would be able to quietly enter her apartment and take her valuables. At the trial, the prosecutor asked Miss Yura a direct question. Tell me, please, your grandmother, who raised you and helped you all your life, was there a way to steal from her apartment differently, without poisoning her for a long time with various substances? Miss Yura sighed heavily. I'll go further. This theft could have been avoided altogether. Everything could have been resolved differently. During the investigation, it will turn out that Irina Misyura's jewelry, which will later be stolen by her own grandson, was not hidden. They were in the closet in her room. The door to that room wasn't even locked, but in Artyom's opinion, going in there while his grandmother was around would have been very strange. So he chose another way. First, he brought his grandmother powdered Orbidol and put poison in it. The elderly woman started feeling unwell almost the same day, and she was taken to the hospital. Miss Yura wanted to look around the apartment, but his uncle, who lived with his mother, was always there, or maybe there were some other obstacles. The opportunity didn't come up, and the woman soon returned home. Later, Artyom's uncle recalled that for several weeks, both before and after the first poisoning, his nephew regularly brought them some groceries, drinks without labels, and homemade food. One day, he even brought water, supposedly from a holy spring. But the water smelled strange. They just poured it down the sink. After some time, Miss Yura tried again. This time, he added poison to the salt. Grandmother got sick again, and once more she was put on an IV, but her elderly body couldn't withstand the ordeal a second time. On April 18, 2024, the woman died. While Irina was in the hospital, Miss Yura managed to pawn her jewelry, a chain and 2 gold rings. The loot turned out to be next to nothing. With millions in debt that kept growing because of interest, he got only about 100,000. Artyom's uncle also ended up in the hospital with signs of poisoning. According to Monsieur himself, it happened by accident. I hoped he wouldn't get poisoned. After all, he's always at work. But that's how it turned out, he sighed in court. The man survived, although he went through the poisoning quite badly. The money received from selling his grandmother's jewelry didn't solve the problem. The interest kept growing, and the debt was about 4 million. Miss Yura finally decided to part with his car, the very same Audi for which he had borrowed money from a friend and never paid back. He was hoping to sell it and at least partially pay off his debts. But an unexpected problem arose. The car had been with Christina's brother, Ilya Dudkin, for more than half a year. According to Artyom, it all started innocently. Something was wrong with the car, and Ilya offered to help. He suggested taking it to someone he knew at an auto repair shop, fixing it and returning it. But time passed, and the car was never returned. However, according to Artyom, Ilya regularly drove it around. When Miss Yura asked to return the car, or at least to show it, he always found excuses. According to Miss Yura's own account, the situation looked almost like an unauthorized seizure of property, and his indignation seemed completely justified. However, according to the interrogation materials, the story was much more complicated. By that time, Artyom had already borrowed significant amounts from Ilya. First, 1.5 million, then another million. But he gave you so much money and you're still not satisfied, the prosecutor pointed out in court. He promised to sell the car, but instead he kept driving it, Miss Yura objected indignantly. He decided to get the car back in a way that had already become familiar to him by that time. Of course, Ilya had to be poisoned. Not to death, but enough to make him feel it. The logic was simple. If the owner of the car ended up in the hospital, the car could be taken back without any trouble. In court, Miss Yura said he tried to resolve the issue peacefully. Christina persuaded me not to get into any conflicts or anything like that. I wanted to ask law enforcement to handle this issue. Christina also asked me not to let it turn into a scandal, he said. And he really didn't let it turn into a scandal. One day, he decided to visit Ilya and prepared a treat for him, a crab roll, into which he added poison. It was expected that they, like decent people, would sit together and have a drink. And then Ilya would supposedly get poisoned by bad vodka and start feeling unwell. But things didn't go according to plan. The roulade was tasted by the guest who happened to be in Dudkin's apartment that day. A young man named Denis Krasnikov. After a few pieces, the man started feeling unwell. He lost consciousness and ended up in the hospital. The doctors managed to help. They saved him. His young and strong body coped with the poison, and his kidneys flushed it out. Krasnikov returned home to Belarus after being discharged. But there he started feeling bad again. He was hospitalized again, this time with a suspected heart attack. It may have been delayed effects of the poisoning. At the trial, Krasnikov said that since then he simply can't eat at someone else's place, and crab rolls and crab sticks in particular make him feel so disgusted that he feels like vomiting. Artyom himself commented on what happened briefly and almost philosophically. I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ilya Dudkin also tried that same role, but he got off relatively easy. Almost immediately after eating, he started feeling very nauseous, and most likely that's what saved him. His body quickly got rid of the poison. He didn't need to be hospitalized. As for Artyom Mesura himself, he felt fine physically, but was emotionally devastated. Things didn't work out with Dudkin. His grandmother died, and he still had no money. So it was time to move on to the main part of the plan, poisoning his mother and stepfather. Over the next few months, Artyom Mesura methodically poisoned Yekaterina Pulina and her husband. He put poison in the salt, sugar, flour, rice, and in the coffee machine. He brought poisoned drinks and food. At the same time, he carefully avoided thinking about the fact that his beloved little sister Sasha, who lives there too, could also be poisoned. Yekaterina and Dmitri were sick. They felt unwell, nauseous, and were vomiting. The doctors pumped their stomachs and put them on IV drips. But after returning home, everything started all over again. The first person to openly question whether Artyom Mesura was involved in what was happening was his stepfather, Dmitri. As a rule, it's extremely hard to imagine that someone you've known your whole life, someone you've raised and basically became a father to, is trying to harm you. But Dmitri noticed that in Artyom's circle, two people had already died, his grandmother and his friend Kostya. And at least two more, Christina and Artyom's uncle, ended up in the hospital with signs of poisoning. In addition, the man noticed that the food in the house periodically had a strange taste. After another bout of illness, Dmitri, fearing not only for his own life but also for the lives of his wife and daughter, went to the police. There he was advised to take a simple but effective step: to install a hidden camera in the kitchen. And the camera soon provided an answer. In the footage, which would later become one of the main pieces of evidence, you could see Mesura entering the relative's apartment, going to the kitchen, and making sure no one was there, sprinkling some kind of white powder from a transparent bag into the food. And this happens over and over again. In June 2024, Artyom Mesura was detained. He did not resist, and almost immediately after being detained, he began to give a confession. I fully admit my guilt. I repent. I sincerely apologize to all my loved ones, relatives, acquaintances, my parents, and friends who experienced difficulties because of my actions. I have completely reconsidered my attitude towards everything, and I stopped living in the illusions I had created for myself before. I don't know how my future will turn out. Whether I will be sent to the Special Military Operations Zone or to prison, Mesura said sincerely from the defendant's bench. However, after some time he retracted part of his testimony. Artyom stated that his confessions were obtained under pressure and that he never actually intended to take anyone's life. He called the deaths of his friend and grandmother tragic accidents. According to his version, at most, he wanted to cause harm to their health, but not to bring about their deaths. Today, Artyom Mesura is accused of taking the lives of two people in a way that endangered the public. Irina Misyura and Konstantin Kaminsky, attempted murder of 7 more people, Kristina and Ilya Dudnik, Artyom's uncle, his mother, stepfather and sister. And also Denis Krasnikov. And also a fraud. The last episode is connected to that very story when, after poisoning Kristina, he took out a loan in her name using her phone. The case is being considered under serious provisions of the Russian Criminal Code, including points A, E, and Z of Part 2 of Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, and Part 3 of Article 159 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. In general, Artyom Mishura is of course someone in whom an inner conflict between his self-image and reality developed early on. On the one hand, he was a calm, intellectually developed, outwardly well-off young man who knew how to give the impression that he was reliable and gentle. He didn't seem confrontational, didn't show aggression directly, easily inspired trust, and overall gave the impression of someone who would rather give in than engage in open conflict. It was this outward gentleness that long masked his inner personality structure. However, psychologically, he was centered on a painful preoccupation with his own importance. For him, the feeling of success, superiority, and recognition was extremely important. At the same time, his real achievements did not match the lifestyle he wanted to display. And there was a chronic gap between his desire for status and his actual situation. Such a gap often leads to the development of compensatory behavior. A person begins to build a facade, a mask, an image of success that is supposed to confirm his value to others and to himself. For Misyura, this facade gradually became more important than reality, when it became impossible to maintain it in the usual way. Through work, career, and gradual growth, he began to look for a faster and riskier path. At the same time, his psyche showed a characteristic trait. Moral restraints were weak if they interfered with achieving his goals. He easily appropriated other people's money, rationalized it, promised to return it, and did not feel a lasting sense of guilt. This indicates a developed ability for self-justification and reduced empathy. Another noticeable trait is emotional coldness combined with good social intelligence. He knew how to behave the way people expected him to be caring, empathetic, and grateful. But it looked more like a role than a genuine feeling. Such people often know how to imitate the right emotions because they understand what reactions are expected from them. That's why those around him didn't notice the dangers for a long time. At the same time, his motivation was not impulsive, but rather calculating. He acted gradually, checking the consequences and observing the results. His behavior shows a type of thinking where people around him are perceived as tools for solving problems. This doesn't necessarily mean a complete lack of feelings, but it does mean that one's own goals and fears become so central that the fates of others start to be seen as secondary. It's also interesting that his aggression is long-lasting. It wasn't expressed directly. It was building up beneath the surface. Outwardly, he could appear calm and even gentle. But inside, a sense of humiliation and inadequacy was growing. The feeling that life was passing him by. When a person with such inner tension finds a way to gain power over others, especially in a secret way, it can create a sense of control and compensation for their own weakness. The stepfather plays an important psychological role in this system. Apparently, he was someone who promoted a rigid model in which strength meant success. He constantly emphasized the stepson's lack of toughness and demanded more assertiveness from him. Such messages, repeated over the years, can create a sense of inferiority in a teenager. Meanwhile, the stepfather showed no direct aggression. The pressure was more psychological. This creates a special form of conflict. Resentment builds up, but it doesn't come out directly. As a result, it can transform into hidden hostility and a desire to prove one's strength in a roundabout way. The mother in this system appears to be an emotionally supportive figure, but not a protective one. She seems to be torn between her husband and her son. She loved her son, helped him, and even tried to ease conflicts. However, she either couldn't or didn't want to go against her husband. For a child, this often means having mixed feelings. On one hand, there is a sense of love, on the other, a lack of real protection. Such dynamics can increase inner instability and create the belief that in a critical situation, a person will be left alone. Christina appears to be a trusting and emotionally involved person. She quickly got involved in the relationship, saw her partner as a reliable and promising man, and overall had a romantic vision of the future. Her behavior indicates a fairly high level of trust and a tendency to interpret strange events in her partner's favor until doubts become too obvious. People with this type of relationship often end up being vulnerable to manipulation. They tend to believe first and only then start doubting. Stepfather Dmitri seems to be a person with a pronounced tendency toward order and control. He sets high standards for those around him and tries to shape the behavior of family members through discipline and constant guidance. Such individuals are often convinced that strictness is the only way to raise a strong person. And here you might ask, so how's that working out? At the same time, they may not notice that constant pressure doesn't build strength in the other person, but rather hidden resentment and protest. Overall, the whole story shows a clash of several psychological dynamics. On one hand, there's a young man with a painful drive for success and a sense of being undervalued. On the other hand, there's the family, where there is pressure and the expectation to conform certain models of strength and success. And when you add debts, the fear of being exposed, and the destruction of your own image to all this, the mind starts looking for radical solutions. In this state, a person gradually stops perceiving what is happening as a tragedy. He starts to see what is happening as a sequence of tasks that need to be solved. That is why Misura's behavior appears cold and almost routine, even in situations where an ordinary person would experience a strong emotional crisis. If Misura's guilt is fully proven, he could face from 25 years to life because, as I mentioned earlier, the charges are serious. Misura himself hopes that the sentence will be a fixed number of years. He does not want to spend his life in prison. At the court hearings, the Balashika poisoner behaves calmly and even a bit detached. Almost no outbursts of emotion, no loud statements. He speaks calmly and confidently, as if he is discussing ordinary everyday matters, just as confidently and calmly as he demonstrated during the investigative reenactment, where he added the poison. I'll post all the additional materials on Telegram. The only thing he clearly doesn't like is cameras. When journalists enter the hall of the Moscow Regional Court, at the beginning of the session, Artyom is already standing with his back turned. To be safe, he pulls his hood over his head and covers his face with a medical mask. He only takes it off after his lawyer appears nearby and the session itself begins. Between hearings, Misura spends his time in the detention center. There, his life follows a rather monotonous routine. The criminal is held in a 4-person cell, where, along with the other inmates, he prefers to sleep almost until 10 in the morning. After getting up, the usual routine begins. Breakfast, hygiene, prayer, preparing food, taking a walk. He spends his free time reading books and working out. According to the staff, he tries to stay in shape and reads a lot. He's almost lost all contact with his family. Sometimes Misura sends emails to his parents, sends them holiday greetings, asks for forgiveness, and writes that he regrets what he did, but he doesn't get any replies. Yekaterina Polina admitted in an interview with journalists that she has forgiven her son, but her husband forbids her from seeing him or replying to his letters. While under investigation for charges of taking a life, attempted murder, and fraud, Misura is already thinking about what he will do after being released. He stated that after his release, he intends to radically change his life. He wants to devote himself, as people like to say nowadays, of course, to devote himself to religion, to make pilgrimages to holy places, and to try to restore his relationship with his family. However, there's one catch. To make such plans, it would be good to actually get out of prison first, but there is a high probability that the 26-year-old criminal will have to spend the rest of his life behind bars. But that's not certain yet. And what do you think about this case? Like, dislike, leave comments, and watch other videos on the channel. They are being released even though you don't always get notifications about it.